Welcome back to another Triple JD podcast, brought to you by Plagued by Flies Production. Today we'll be talking about Frankenstein and the parallels between that and Paradise Lost. Juan, if you could start us off.
Let's begin about the media res. So when we first open up in Frankenstein, it's where we open up in the scene of Walton. They're in the North Pole, and this is the part. It's like where we start learning about. This is where we're gonna learn about the story of Frankenstein. And so this is the parallelism to Paradise Lost, because in Paradise Lost we first learn about the rebellion against God, the Satan's rebellion against God, and so we have to learn about that, and then we segue into Pandemonium, and so that's where we are in Frankenstein, where we see Walton, and they segue into like the story of Frankenstein.
I don't know, guys. Like, I think it's interesting that like you have that kind of parallel, but I mean, do you think they did it as well as Paradise Lost? Just because, like, I mean, with Paradise Lost, you have this kind of like you're in the actual middle, whereas with Frankenstein, it's kind of like at the very end, like the very tail end, everything happens and you come back to it.
I think there's more connection in Paradise Lost than it is in Frankenstein.
Like a continuity,
because in
you really
Paradise,
see a
Paradise, Paradise Lost, you get the feeling of what's gonna happen, but in Frankenstein, you're a bit like.
Yeah, I think it would have been more effective if like they started off like maybe with him being created like Frankenstein, or like him like fleeing from his creator. That would have been more effective. That would have given like the audience like a better idea of what they were about to see or what it would foreshadow.
Like how it kind of just like jumps back and forth is a kind of weird, wishy-washy kind of narrative, and I mean that's why I kind of like Paradise Lost in that aspect. But as far as comparison, that's how we see the the whole media res thing, that tying in, that just creating a cool sort of like atmosphere where you see the whole story. Beyond that, let's go ahead and talk about like an important part, which is like the revenge. I mean, the way I saw it was Frankenstein wanting revenge, killing Elizabeth, and then like wanting a mate. Like, where do you guys see that connection from that to, Paradise Lost and revenge with Satan? Like, do you see it with sort of like Satan's revenge, or do you see it with like Adam sort of like realizing?
I see it kind of like as Frankenstein being a representation of Adam, how he wanted a companion, and so God gave him Eve, and with that, like, Adam didn't want anything else for God because he was lonely on Paradise, or in Paradise.
You had something to say?
No, I was gonna say something about how sin and how Adam learns about what's gonna happen to the future generations, and so like because of their disobedience into Frankenstein's their creation, it's just gonna ruin their future.
I see it more as being a representation of Satan because, just after being created and fleeing from his creator, the monster is pretty confused and kind of lonely, and I think that's a really accurate portrayal of how Satan felt when he was being cast out of heaven by God. Just this state of confusion, like what just happened. But I think it's more Satan rather than Adam for me. I don't know.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point, because I mean, like, along the lines of like Satan thinking that like not just how Satan just didn't fit in, but like how Satan kind of looks at God as a sort of like, you made me out to fail, like you created me,
Because both Adam goes to the thing of, why did you create me if you knew this was gonna happen? And so this isn't with the creation. He goes, when he's looking at those notes, it's like, why would you create me? And he even abandoned them immediately. And so, like in Paradise Lost, it's God. The most thing that God does is send His Son, but that's like past after the flood, and they have to go through all the destruction.
That's an interesting point. Just because I mean, like if you think about it, I'd say that Frankenstein like likens a little bit more to Satan, more than it does Adam. And I mean, the only reason why I say that is because like Juan mentioned, Adam just kind of like after he was told like these reasons are beyond you, then he just gives up and he understands and he obeys. With Satan, he kind of like you created me to be evil, so I'm gonna be evil. And like contrary to that, I think as a reader perspective, and also much like Walton the captain, you have the kind of same perception that like it wasn't really God creating them to be a certain way, as much as it was God giving them the kind of choice to do things. Like I mean, with Paradise Lost, how it's kind of like how God says, you have free will, and even though I have foresight, you're able to still choose your own fate. Like I'll know the future of what you do, like of all those different choices, but what the future you choose is up to you. Kind of like how you have different decisions, and ultimately the decision you make is one that you stick with and one that creates and shapes you. And I mean that's evident with Walton, just because at the very end of the movie you see like how he just listened to the story. And when the creature starts to cry over Victor, instead of Walton being like this person much like Satan or much like Frankenstein that like vows revenge and decides to do something terrible, he instead like says, what, like it's your choice and you have the will to do whatever you want.
And then that's where we start talking about free will.
Exactly.
Tavares, I know you wanted to talk about the fire and the.
Yes.
Yeah.
With and during like the end of the movie, Elizabeth dies, and so and the maid named Justine dies, or the servant named Justine dies, and so the Frankenstein's monster propositions that Victor used Justine's body, and so he puts Elizabeth's head on Justine's body to resurrect Elizabeth for his purposes, and that makes Frankenstein mad. So when Elizabeth comes back to life, when she sees what she is, she decides, I can't live with what I become, so she self-immolates herself by burning herself to the alive. And what that's a representation of baptism by fire, and what that means is like you purge yourself of like all your sins or like what you become by like burning yourself to death. And that's an interesting point how you say Frankenstein's monster is a representation of Satan, because to me I believe that Victor is a representation of Satan and how he tried to amount to what God was, because he tried to create life, and knowing that that's God's role, he tried to become God. Mm-hmm. And like that parallels how Satan's pride and like free will, he tried to become what God was, and that got him cast out of heaven with the rebellion. So that's
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know that baptism was like purging yourself of.
Yeah.
Dude, I don't think I saw much about like any correlation to the Son of God and like redeeming them. Like the only thing I thought about was when he was the baptism by the fire. Yeah. I was thinking maybe that's the Son of God, like cleansing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because
I don't know how far that could go.
I get you. Like I know that in Paradise Lost, God says I'll be able to save humankind, but we need to show them grace first. And in order for he didn't say that. He says like I can show grace, but the only way for that to happen is if they fail first. If they mess up, then I'll be able to show them grace and I'll be able to show them love. And like that's interesting, because much like in Frankenstein, you see that sort of redemption. Like the whole sort of grace coming back, and like I guess forgiveness, as much like I guess you could call it forgiveness, but I mean I don't know, like
it's more of self-comfort, like a self-relief, like
I get you, kind of like relieving yourself, like when you purge yourself.
Because Victor had gone to kill his creation there in the North Pole, and then but he fails, but at the same time, like I was seeing a little correlation back again, God trying to cleanse his man with the flood, but
I guess you. I guess, like, yeah, I guess you could, because the timeline kind of follows, like, you have, the mess up, and then you have, like, the monster becoming terrible, like, humanity becoming terrible, that leading to God wanting to cleanse it, the flood, and then at that point, I guess the flood would be representative of the storm in the beginning, and people finding them, because at that point you see a sort of shift in Victor's perspective. Because once Victor recounts his story, by the end of it, I really don't think that Victor really is, as as I guess vengeful is the right word, because like through the tail end of his own flashback, he talks about how he's like full of anger and like, well, he doesn't talk about it, but you can see it. Like, you really see how angry he is at Frankenstein and how how much despair is going through him. But once he finishes that story, Victor's kind of at peace. Even though he does that in pneumonia, he's in this sort of place, I'd say, that like he's like accepting of what he's done. And that's why when the monster comes back, he starts to cry. Because he did cause pain.
That would be like when
It's
Adam
like-
was already gonna leave paradise. That they're
Yeah, I
leaving
realize.
crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that that's where you see the humanity and Adam in the monster. I mean, because the thing you got to realize is that like Frankenstein is a lot like a mix of characters, not just because he's literally like pieces of different people put together, but if you think about it, like Adam and Satan are both evident in Frankenstein. You kind of see like these two pieces where like you see like humanity in him, and then you see this like revenge, and then you see this questioning, and you see this manifestation of evil, kind of like loops and kind of like a yin and yang sort of thing.
Here's to all of us. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to like point out or I guess ask the question what did you guys think about this whole idea of him trying to evade death by creating life, and his search for knowledge to really create the monster.
Well,
This idea of knowledge portrayed in the movie.
to me, I think that his search of knowledge is what ultimately caused him his downfall, just like in Paradise Lost with the Tree of Knowledge and Satan's influence. I think when he saw his mother die, it really hurt him. So like that was his fruit to make him go down the path of evil to get that knowledge to bring back life, and that was what ultimately caused like the downfall of him altogether.
I was thinking more. Here's an idea for all of us. I didn't see much of the parallelism between like how in Paradise Lost, like Adam is being told about the future of what's gonna happen, and I don't see much of that in Frankenstein. It kind of just ends with
Yeah,
with,
like
with Victor dying.
Yeah, and
and
the monster killing himself on fire too.
I mean, like I know what you're saying, that like that's not evident, but I'd say that's the sort of thing that you see from Walton. Like at the end of it, like Walton decides, you know what, like if the monster's gonna go ahead and stick with if he's gonna stick with his master, then like I'll let that be.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the sort of comfort that like, because at the very end, that's where he decides that like will is up to myself, and I don't have to chase whatever like conception or precept that's set before me. And that's where he decides, you know what, let's stop trying to reach the North Pole and let's go ahead and turn back. I mean, you see that kind of like hope that it's like, don't become obsessed and you'll be fine. Like kind of like the hope at the end of the tunnel for the crew as well. Like that kind of like understanding of will sets him on that path. And I guess you could say that's much like Adam seeing the end, seeing like redemption through Jesus. You could see it as Walton seeing like redemption through choice, because at the end he chooses to save his crew members and everything else and make his own journey.
Well said. Well, I think that would be it for.
But I think we still have a little bit more points to tackle. No, you were talking about the beginning of the book, how Victor kind of looked like Satan, and I thought that was interesting. But
Well, I know there was like the foreshadowing and like.
Well, there was a little piece of foreshadowing at the beginning of the book, like when he was seeing that kind of like figure come towards him, and he was like, "Well, what is that?" Well, that could be like foreshadowing the monster.
Yeah, there was a foreshadowing of the monster's revival with like the lightning bolt hitting the tree and splitting it. That was like the foreshadowing of like what was to come.
Because we've seen that foreshadowing before, where it's automatically going to be doomed.
Yeah.
yeah, so that's an interesting point, because what do you guys think Victor represents? Because I mean, we've talked about Frankenstein's monster, but we haven't talked about Victor himself. Who do you guys think Victor along the lines is?
Well, I think DeVars mentioned that he
I think he was
He-
a representation of
Satan
Satan.
because he wanted to like equate to God,
Ah,
and
Like
create
creating
this
life,
this-
like trying to get up to God.
yeah.
So, but
I
yeah,
get you.
like caused a downfall.
I guess you. Okay. What about Elizabeth? Who do you guys think that is?
Oh, that's a tough
That
one.
is a tough one.
Like I think we said it, like briefly mentioned earlier, like maybe it's the Son of God of redemption, or
I wouldn't
she,
know that.
She could be possibly Eve because in the beginning she
Yeah,
was like his
sure.
adopted
I
sister.
think. I think.
and how he needed a
Sure.
companion too.
I think.
and then they do end up. Like, I was gonna say like fall in love or no?
Doesn't
yeah,
he?
they,
Yeah.
I'd say they do.
Yeah.
They get married.
They get married.
They get married.
I'd say though that Frankenstein's companion, like the abomination version of Elizabeth, that's more along the lines of Eve. And I mean, like it's pretty terrible, but like how she kind of just like submits and like gives up.
Yeah.
That's
I
the
think
kind
that was
of
something that would be opposite of what Eve would do, don't you think? Like just giving up and
Yeah, 'cause-
like
I mean, Eve was like thinking of committing suicide, but she doesn't go through with it. But Elizabeth did go through with it because she didn't want to be. She didn't want to stay what she was.
Yeah, I get you. What would you guys? I don't know, cause I was kind of caught up on the fact that like the monster version of Elizabeth is this sort of like she falls in love with Victor in a sense where it's more forced than it is like hey like you can choose me, but like still at the same time I guess she could be even the way that she's caught up in like this act of innocence was like she never chose to be born, and yet she was caught up in this sort of like trial of Satan trying to destroy them,
Yeah.
or Victor and Frankenstein, if anything, because both of them are kind of an amalgamate of every character. And I mean that's where you kind of see this weird sort of parallel, just because you see how Eve and the abomination version, the female version of Frankenstein, this monster, is how they're just both caught up in this whole catch-22 situation. Or not even like this catch-22 situation, but where their voice isn't heard. Because I mean, in almost all of Paradise Lost, you see how like there's no choice for Eve to to join them, to listen to anything that they're talking about. And then beyond that, you have this sort of abomination that doesn't get to choose if she wants to love Frankenstein's monster or Victor Frankenstein, or neither. She just kind of forced into this love one of us two because you were created.
that's why.
Yeah, good point.
All right, guys. I think that's everything.
Yeah, that covers everything so far.
Thank you for joining us.
This has been Triple JE.
Alright, then
See you next
that was a good name.
Alright, guys. If you guys want to, before we forget, if you guys want to reply, make sure to go in the comment section below. Tell us what you think. Tell us who you think Eve is, who Adam was, if Pandemonium's there. Like, we'd like to hear you guys' thoughts, and
Open to all discussion.
we'll see you guys next time.
We'll see you in second period.
Second period.